Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sakalis, coming at you on. We're recording on this Sunday. You'll see this or hear this podcast on Monday as Alabama has lost its second game this season, dropping to 5-2, 2-2 in SEC play, and has now lost two of its last three. The Tide losing on the third Saturday in October for the second time in 3 years, falling 24-17 at the hands of Tennessee, seeing another orange field storming, and more goalposts torn down for the second time this season for the Crimson Tide, and a pretty grim mood. I'm sure if you're an Alabama fan waking up on Sunday morning and even probably Monday morning as you head into work and whatnot, and try to process what is suddenly a seemingly derailing season, Tony. I mean, we're going to get into the game, but your opening kind of impressions from what you saw on Saturday. We were obviously both in attendance at Neyland, but the Tide, dropping one that they really, really could have had after, kind of a flip-flop game for which unit was playing poorly on Saturday night.
Look, this Alabama team at the moment is just not elite. It's not an elite team. It's not a bad team. It's just probably, a middle of the road SEC team the way that it's playing. That's just how I feel. But the problems haven't gotten any better, Jack. All the problems. The third down, can't get off the field on defense on third downs. You're too reliant on offense on the big play. And when that doesn't happen, you can't sustain drives. Can't run the ball with especially not with your running back. So when Jalen Milroe is, not doing things on the ground the way he normally does, it really hampers your running game. You saw how bad Alabama's running game was. So, there's a lot of stuff. No adjustments really. When you look at the way this team, things weren't working on offense. I don't think Alabama made the adjustments. I think Tennessee kind of did, and that was the difference in the second half. You're not seeing that from Alabama, and it's just it's kind of concerning. And it's you would think that some of these things would get fixed, but really it's been 10 straight quarters of really bad football, because you had the second half of Georgia. What am I talking about? 14 straight quarters, because then you got Vanderbilt and South Carolina and then this. So yeah, 14 straight quarters of just just not great football. And it's starting to be like, what is Alabama? Yes, they beat Georgia with probably the best half of football that's been played this season by any team. But then after that, they really haven't been impressive since Wisconsin. So it's tough. They've been tough to watch. I know if I was an Alabama fan, I'd be frustrated. So, but it doesn't necessarily seem like things are getting a lot better. Even look at a Jalen Milroe, right? You kind of thought that he was progressing as a passer, but once last 2 weeks when he's faced really defenses that were able to pressure him, he's made poor decisions and hasn't been able to distribute the ball the way he needs to. So it's really concerning. I think Alabama still has the potential to be a great team, but at the moment they're just not one.
Yeah, and I mean, let's go into some of that, because to me, the theme when we talked to Kalen DeBoer after the game was, him just finally admitting that, like you said, this team has not really put a complete game together. You saw in the first half, the defense, Kane Womack's unit, came out and did what he's been preaching all season. They forced 3 turnovers. They were getting pressure. Dylan Sampson, Tennessee's elite running back, wasn't able to do anything. Forced a couple mistakes from Nico Iamaleava and one from the backup quarterback when he came in for one play and threw a pick. And yet Alabama's offense is ending a first half with 7 points and nothing really to show for
nothing on those turnovers. Nothing, not a single point on those turnovers.
Yeah, didn't force any turnovers. And then in the second half, the offense, wakes up a little bit. You actually saw a slight, I'm emphasizing that word heavily, slight reliance on the running game, and then a little bit more scoring. But then the defense started to crumble. The third down stopped, I guess, for lack of a better term. They weren't getting stops on third down. It was the typical, allowing big plays. Dylan Sampson woke up. Iamaleava was able to hit some big time throws, and it sort of flip-flopped. And like you said, in these last 14 quarters, neither unit has really managed to put together a full game. So I guess between or within that summary, what was the most concerning things to you, whether it was offensively or defensively, in either the first or second half?
I think I think probably the most concerning thing for me is the running game because it just doesn't seem like Alabama can run the ball. And then one of the things that really concerned me after the game was Kalen DeBoer kind of saying that they need the explosive plays to set up the run. I would argue it's the other way around most of the time. I think most teams that can successfully sustain drives, they use the run or the constant, the running game is usually your muscle. It's usually, what you pride yourself on, know, and that usually sets up your bigger plays. I guess it works in reverse as well, but I don't think you necessarily need explosive plays to set up the run. And if you do, you're in trouble. I think, kind of both ways. If you need, the run to set off any kind of explosive plays, then you're in trouble. And then you're in trouble the way that Alabama is right now is where you can't run unless you have them. You should be able to kind of create both without the other. I get that you need to have a balance of running and then big plays as well, but I don't think that if you're not getting the big play, you can't just say, well, we're just not going to be able to move the ball on the ground. That's just certainly not the case. So yeah, that's probably the most concerning thing for me because I just don't really know what Alabama has there. You look at Jam Miller and you look at Justice Haynes, and you think you've got two really, really good backs, and then you look at the interior line of Alabama was supposed to be the best interior line in the nation, and then Caden Proctor's playing really well. I know the right tackle position hasn't been great, but I mean, it really shouldn't be as bad as it is. But you look at Alabama's running game; it's just not there, and so I don't know if it's going to be there. I don't know if they have what it takes, or if it's a scheming thing, or if it's a talent thing. But it's 7 games into the season, and it's not getting much better.
Yeah, no, in fact, it's been trending in a worse direction as these games have gotten worse for Alabama. 75 yards rushing, season low on that. They averaged 2.2 yards a carry as a team. Obviously, Milrow was sacked 3 times. You have to factor that in. That was a season low. And in fact, the game before that, it was, I think, 2.7 against South Carolina. That was a season low. Game before that, it was 4 against Vanderbilt. That was a season low. So it's been decreasing over the last 3 games. 4 of Alabama's offensive linemen starters, it was all 4 not named Tyler Booker, PFF rated as their lowest run blocking grades. None of them had, I believe, higher than a 48, which I think that went to Parker Brailsford. So just really inexcusable blocking. Obviously, Tennessee, and DeBoer said as much, has a pretty physical defensive front, but there really has not been a shed of a run game. And like you said, I think you put it perfectly. You're not really sure what they have in Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. I mean, we saw Justice Haynes rip off, I think I looked back and it was 4 carries for like 102 yards against Western Kentucky. And since then, I really haven't been able to see the chance, like those two have a chance to make explosive plays. It's just
But
been bottled
even
up.
that, it came on like a 75-yard run. I
Mhm.
mean, he hasn't been moving the ball consistently on the ground, and even when you saw some of those big time, uh, the numbers are still great for Alabama's running backs. But if you look, a lot of that I think is big play dependent. And I'm not saying you should just take away those big plays, but it's kind of deceptive in terms of what they've actually been able to do on the ground. I mean, I'm going to look at Justice Haynes' numbers, and that, yeah, you look at that the 4 carries, 102 yards. He had 85 of that on one run. So,
Right.
at 17 yards on 3 carries. I mean, that's actually not bad, but the next week it's not as good, and it's just he really hasn't been. The next week, put it this way: there's the USF game's a better depiction of what I'm talking about, right? He has 13 carries for 46 yards and a touchdown. That's not bad. It's 3.5 yards a carry. It could be better, but that's not what you would say bad. You take 29 of that came on one run, so now you're what is it, 35 of like 15 yards or 25 yards on 12 carries, or I'm bad at math. It's more like 15 yards on 12 carries. I mean, that's not good. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about, where it just gets really you know Yeah, you can hit one big play, but they're not getting the consistent 4 or 5 yard runs that they need to set up the rest of their offense.
Yeah, and I think it ties into, both things have been frustrating. You haven't had enough of those one big plays in the running game from Haynes or Miller. And then, yeah, they haven't had the chance to really string that momentum together. I mean, Jam Miller's 12 carries is just the fifth time that either running back has had over 10 carries in a game this season. So, the opportunities really haven't been there for them. The blocking clearly hasn't been there at times. And then, like you said, I think you made a really important point, and that was the biggest one that stuck out to me, is DeBoer saying exactly what you said. It should be the opposite. Him saying they need the explosive plays to establish the run. It feels like this team should maybe look into establishing the run to try and generate some of those explosive plays. And I think that's a good segue, to another one of the biggest talking points. And I know you asked Kalen DeBoer about this, which was, in these eyes of Alabama fans, it looked like it was a force feeding to Ryan Williams on the offensive side of the ball at times. He finished with 8 catches, 73 yards, and 1 touchdown. But obviously, the number everyone is talking about is his 18 targets. Next highest player on Alabama was Jeremy Bernard with 5. There was obviously the interception that Jalen Milroe threw, which was, I know questioned by some what the play call was there. A lot of throws into him and single and double coverage that just didn't seem like he was able to go make a play on the ball. What did you make of kind of the passing distribution, in particular to Ryan Williams and Jalen Milroe? Threw the ball 45 times.
Yeah, I don't think that Kalen DeBoer's running the get the ball to Jalen Milroe play. I think
You mean
that
Ryan Williams? Let's get the ball to Ryan Williams.
yeah, get the ball to Ryan Williams play. I don't
Yeah.
think it's just like everything schemed up for Ryan Williams. I think part of it's on, maybe Jalen not being able to. I have to go back and look through the tape. We drove back from Knoxville on we're recording this on Sunday, so I haven't gotten to look back at maybe everything. But I think it's probably, if there's that much attention to one receiver and, you're not really even getting, if you're getting 18 targets, you're expecting to get more production out of Ryan Williams than what you got against Tennessee. You're probably missing a lot of receivers. And I know I saw some of the clips on social media that Jalen missed receivers. I'd have to go back and watch the full game myself before I really kind of like dive into that. But I think some of it is just, better ball distribution, and not maybe relying on a trusted target and trusting all your targets, because you look at it, Alabama was pretty much at full strength when it, came to wide receivers. They got Kobe Prentice back. They got Kendrick Law back. Jeremy Bernard's a guy that's been doing well. And he did get the ball. Jalen Miller did get the ball to Jeremy Bernard a few times, and, he was productive on the day. But I think, you got to get more Kendrick Law the ball more. You got to get, like the guy that I think was the talking point after the game was Caleb Odom. He retweeted some tweets and, that kind of criticized Jalen Milroe, and really criticized, not as much, I don't think, Jalen Milroe as terms of just not getting him the ball. He kind of expressed his frustration of not getting the ball through retweets. I think almost, maybe dial up some plays for other receivers, almost to force, I don't want to say force the ball away from Ryan Williams, but forced to open up some things a little bit more, draw up a play that's really designed for Kendrick Law, because if you can find a way to get him the ball, that gets more attention off of Ryan Williams. It gets more attention off of other receivers, and you kind of spread things out. So even if it's not Jalen Milroe, even if Jalen Milroe is struggling to go through his progressions and he's relying too much on Ryan Williams, I think it's your job as an offense to kind of draw up plays to maybe get the ball out to other players, maybe get the ball out to screens to Justice Haynes. I know they did that a couple times, but it's still something that you can kind of draw up, different wrinkles to maybe open up the offense a little bit more, because it wasn't just, throwing to an open Ryan Williams. I think there was a lot of times where they were just forcing it up, but they, that it looked non-creative. And I think this offense is better than that. And it definitely has the tools to be better than that. It's not an offense that only has one receiver. This is not like, it's not even, the 2008 Alabama team that had Julio Jones and he was so much better than everyone else. Ryan Williams is a freshman. You've got some experienced receivers on this team that can also make plays. So let them make plays and draw up plays for them. It'll only
I
make
like
Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. It'll take some of the attention away. This was very much the overthinking Ryan Williams game. Like, he can just go up and grab everything and see, what you can do. But I like your point too about getting a little bit more creative. I mean, this is supposed to be kind of an offensive guru and Kalen DeBoer. You have Nick Sheridan who can dial up some fun calls, using Kendrick Law and Jeremy Bernard and different ways where you maybe have Ryan Williams as sort of, a disguise that pulls defenders away and creates more interesting matchups. But you're right. It felt very stale, very uncreative. It was just, let's let Jalen Milroe try and chuck the ball to someone and see if it'll stick. And it obviously, did not on Saturday. And it became very, very one dimensional. And you're right. Hard to watch at times. Another, I think, big talking point, coming away from the game, and Kalen DeBoer and players were asked about this. And, I'll let you kind of sum up what people said. Penalties again plaguing Alabama. They are continue to climb and being one of the most penalized teams in the SEC. Finished out the day, had 15 penalties, I think, for 115 yards, if my quick math is correct. It was the most penalized game they've had, ironically, since the last time they were in Knoxville 2 years ago, when I think they had 130 yards of penalties. Mistakes just plagued both sides of the ball, Tony. And I'm just curious your thoughts on some of the ones you saw and what kind of the problem is with a team that just at times sort of looks undisciplined. And I'll quickly touch on, I think, the one everyone's going to go to, which was, of course, Kendrick Law at the end of the game. My take on that is, I think Alabama fans, it might be fair to feel a little hard done by in the moment. Boo Carter, who was the cornerback on that play, was drawing, and even to me looked like took a swing at Kendrick Law after that initial push. But to me, you still have to, as a veteran on the team, have to stay a little bit more disciplined there. But whether you have a take on that on that play specifically, but just your thoughts on kind of another mistake-filled game and
You
penalties.
gotta be better than that, but I don't know. See, I was on the field when that happened. I don't know if I guess he did push someone. I feel like you either find a way to give that offsetting, or that's a play that really could have really kind of changed the outcomes of the game. And I just don't. I think that was not a huge push. I don't know what I don't like that call. I guess by the letter of the law, you make it, and like you said, Kendrick Law has to do better than that. He was getting goaded on, and then there was a little bit of back and forth. I think you could have easily made that offsetting penalties, and then you're handling the situation without really influencing the game in a way that I don't think it necessarily needed to be influenced at that time. And I'm not even just saying that for Alabama's benefit. I just think for better football, I didn't think that was, warranted of the magnitude of that call. But you can't be making those kind of plays. And so, I mean, Kendrick Law is a veteran. Yeah, I think you talk to him about that, but that wasn't even the. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was one of the biggest penalties, but I mean, there was the pass interferences on there's at least one pass interference on third down. I'm thinking of
there was one called on Jihad Campbell that set up Tennessee, I believe, with first and goal at the 2, and they scored on the next play, and it would have been third down.
They have a pass interference on a third down.
The 3rd and 13 that gave him a first down. That was the first defensive penalty of the game.
Yeah, I mean that's tough. A third, that's the thing too. It's like you're giving away, and then so often, it's not the penalties, especially on third down, have been on. It's not even just been on like 3rd and 2s or something like that. It's been like 3rd and long, where they're not going to pick up the third down. I mean, I don't know. With Alabama, maybe they would, but I mean, a lot of times it's been on plays where the only way they were going to get a first down is through a penalty, and you gave it to them, So that's just lack of discipline in my book. You really can't blame one side of the ball. I'm looking at it right here. You had 8 penalties on defense and 7 on offense, so it was pretty spread out. They were tough, though. I mean, I'm looking at it right here. Yeah, you had 2 pass interferences. The other one was on 2nd and 9, so you turn a 3rd and 9 into a first down. You had a 3rd and 5 holding call, which is essentially a pass interference. You had that roughing the passer penalty that you were talking about. So it's just tough. And then on offense, you're looking at that false start, but then um, you have just little things like a delay of game, making a 3rd and 14, a 3rd and 19. Holding penalties, will totally kill a drive. You turn to 3rd and 6 into a 3rd and like 16. So it's just, you're making life harder on yourself, and it's just it's that lack of discipline. You had 10 penalties too in the first half, or 10 or 11 in the first half,
Yep.
if I remember right. So yeah, I mean, like that's an insane number. I mean, I think whenever you get into double digit penalties, you're in trouble. I mean, that for a game, that's usually a bad sign. And to get that in one half was just absolutely insane. I think a lot of that's on the players, but some of that is also on the coaching. I mean, like, you have to kind of instill that discipline. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, Nick Saban's teams would have never had that. This is something I think Alabama's been struggling for. It seems like the last 2 or 3, and maybe even 3 or 4 years. It's been a while where penalties have been a big problem for this team. So it's not, you can't really always say it's the coaching staff, because Alabama's gone through a lot of assistants. They've gone through 2 different head coaches now. And so it's not necessarily the coaching staff. I think sometimes just the players, especially the veteran players, need to be, to be more disciplined, especially when you're on the road. I mean, you're not going to get some of those calls. Go back to the Kendrick Law call. Do you get that in Bryant-Denny Stadium? Maybe not. But when the fans, when the fans are going to be providing so much energy, and that they could have an influence in a situation like that, you just got to be a little bit smarter. So that's something that Alabama has enough problems, whether it's 3rd down breakdowns, whether it's not being able to run the ball. They don't need to shoot themselves in the foot by having extra obstacles by penalties. So that just adds to everything.
To put a stat to context in all of that with what you just said, Alabama is now 7th in the country in penalty yards, 548 yards worth of penalties. I believe they're 5th in just total penalties called, with 62 through 7 games.
7th worst, right? Like
7th worst, correct. They have the 7th most penalty yards,
Yeah.
I guess allowed or called on them, however you phrase that, but not good. Yeah. Two very worrying stats. And you talk about the lack of discipline, and we've been talking a lot of bad. I don't know if there's too much good you can really take away from this game, but I want to ask you about the defense, and then kind of finish up with just the overall sort of message or identity of this team, which I think is an interesting talking point. But on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like a large amount of response I've seen from this game, or just trying to pay attention to how fans have reacted, has kind of given Kane Womack his flowers, which, I want to ask you about that, because it was, a good first half from the defense. They did what he asked, like we said at the top, with the 3 takeaways. But, to me, I mean, Tennessee was still ended up, completing 42.9% of their 3rd downs, outscored Alabama in the second half, punched in touchdowns. Nico Iamaleava hit a few big throws. Dylan Sampson once again had a good game. Maybe it's just a situation where no one can stop that guy, but had 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. They had 214 yards on the ground as a team. I don't know if it's necessarily a game worthy of giving flowers to defense still, even though you did have a better first half than you've seen this defense play in the last, 10 quarters of football. How would you kind of assess the defensive performance just as a whole?
Yeah, and I've heard people say, "Oh, well, they were on the field so much." I mean, Alabama held the advantage in time of possession, 33-15 to 26-32. So I don't know if it was necessarily that the defense was on the field. I think it's more of a case of like, look, you're getting those stops, you're getting those turnovers that you work so hard to get on, and your offense is doing nothing about it, and you're not getting any help, and you're the way I say it a lot of times with defense, it's almost like a pitching analogy where if your offense is not getting you any help, and you're always in clutch situations where you have to stop the other offense, it's almost like those are almost like the pitches where you have people on base, and you have to throw the ball a little bit harder, so they're a little bit, your pitch count it wears you down a little bit more because you don't have that reassurance of, oh, the offense is going to get my back, or, oh, we have a 10-point lead or a 14-point lead. You're constantly playing with very little margin of error. And if your offense is not moving the ball, then you're also playing in tougher spots on the field. So I think that, that all plays a part in maybe the defense breaking down. I think you do have to give it credit for the 3 first half turnovers and shutting Tennessee down, keeping them off the scoreboard entirely in the first half. I think you saw signs of this defense, and even on third down, I think in the first half, I think what were they 1 for 5? Tennessee was 1 for 5. So you're like, oh wow, that's getting fixed. And then I think they went something like 5 of 9 in the second half, and it kind of negates it because it's 50%. But I think that there's signs on both sides. I just think that it's like this. Kalen DeBoer kind of talked about it, like you said at the beginning of the show, of just either side can't help each other out. When the defense can't get stops, the offense can't have its back and have that killer. Or when the defense is getting stops, the offense can't have its back and kind of take advantage of that and kind of have that killer instinct and go up by multiple scores. And then when the defense isn't getting stops, it seems like the offense can't when the offense can't get things going, or is getting things going, the defense can't get the stops to kind of help go up by those multiple scores. Like it's either a shootout or a slugfest, and there's really no in between. Alabama hasn't really like came in and handled somebody really since Wisconsin, or since the first half of Georgia. The first half of Georgia, you were getting things working both ends, right? You were getting the turnovers you needed from defense, and then the offense was just marching down the field, and you built up like a 30-7 lead. And that's what I think there was opportunities to build up at least maybe like a 17-point lead against Tennessee in the first half. I think if you do that, I think the defense continues to keep things rolling, and this is a much different story. I think probably Tennessee does make those second half adjustments, and that's another thing too, is Alabama's second half adjustments haven't been as good as the teams that they've been playing. But if you have those killer instincts, it's a lot easier to make those adjustments. It puts the other team in different situations, and you can really kill off teams, and that can also maybe help the running game a little bit more if you're getting points and you're just trying to you start breaking the will of the opponent. But when you play with your food and you don't kill people off when you have the opportunity to kill them off, it really it proves costly. I mean, that interception that Jalen Milroe threw, where Alabama drove down to the 4-yard line or so, and didn't come away with any points, that's killer. Because at the very least, I think they should be up by 10 points at that point, and that would have been at least a two-score game, and all of a sudden you just come away with nothing. In fact, that ball was intercepted and returned a good bit, so once again put the defense in a hard spot where you didn't even give the defense the ability to make a stop in opposing territory. They returned it all the way. So that was such a backbreaker. That was such the definition of the first half, where Alabama just couldn't take advantage of anything.
Yeah, and I don't even think I have a question here, but more just a thought, or maybe a summary of the frustration that I think Alabama fans are feeling, is because, like you just said, we saw it all come together, and you just wonder what's kind of happened since. We saw it come together in that first half against Georgia, where the turnovers were there, the energy was there defensively, and the offense had that killer instinct, it seemed like, anyway, to go down and take advantage. And it even fell apart in that game in the second half. And it really, since that magical first half, hasn't been able to be captured by this team. And I just wonder how you find that again, because it really has just been a sputter since. And I'm not sure. You have to dig deep, and I guess that leads into my next thing is we heard from Kalen DeBoer after. We heard Jalen Milroe kind of say as usual about taking accountability for the things that went wrong offensively. Kalen DeBoer giving his usual message, like you said, about digging deep and all that. But how concerned are you at this point? This is 3 times on the bounce now. You didn't see the response you wanted after a Vanderbilt loss. You didn't see the response you wanted against a rival after a narrow game against South Carolina. You're playing a Missouri team who on paper you should handle. But, from a leadership perspective, from a locker room perspective, I've seen all sorts of, frankly, asinine things said about Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe, which frankly, I don't, reactions are what they are. This team is down right now. I get it. But just how concerned are you from an identity, a leadership standpoint of how they can turn this ship around? Because, you're on thin ice now. One loss doesn't really matter who it's to, probably puts you in big jeopardy for the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to be at least a little bit concerned about the leadership of this team because it hasn't gotten fixed. I mean, I'm not saying that Kalen DeBoer or Jalen Miller or anyone can't turn it around, but to say that you're not concerned about it would be silly because I mean, like, it was supposed to be fixed. Well, first of all, you weren't supposed to have a letdown against Georgia, and they had the rat traps, and that didn't work. And then, or sorry, after Georgia, you weren't supposed to have a letdown after Georgia against Vanderbilt, and you had all the rat traps and all that. And then, you had that letdown, and then you were supposed to have a really big response against South Carolina, and you didn't. And then now you lose your second game in 3 weeks, and things are really tough. Now, there's definitely an avenue for things to turn around against Alabama. They play a ranked team that I think is a very beatable ranked team. You come in, you have your back against the wall. This is a game where you could really put up a great performance against Missouri. Then you have an open week, so you kind of like build on that, and then you basically have your playoff decider in a lot of ways against LSU, and so maybe you build this momentum on a big time performance against Missouri, and then you make a lot of corrections, and you really got to use that open week to your advantage. But encouragingly so. They had an open week before the Georgia game, and they look how they came out against Georgia. So maybe you can work some of that magic. If you come out hot against LSU, you win that game against LSU, and now all of a sudden you've got things rolling again. You have the game against Mercer, which is kind of like a free space game. And then you've got a trip to Oklahoma, which, I mean, the way this team's playing right now could be tricky, but I don't really like Oklahoma to beat Alabama. I mean, like, especially if they did have things rolling at that time. And then you've got the Iron Bowl, but the Iron Bowl is in Bryant-Denny this year. So, I mean, like, there's an avenue that Alabama gets into the playoffs so that they can win the rest of their games. It's not that unheard of. You look at the way that they're playing right now, and, you talk about the leadership and maybe the way that the players look. It seems kind of preposterous to say that that they're not going to lose again when every game it looks like they could lose. I think the way that they're playing now, I mean, they're not going to lose to Mercer, but they could lose to Missouri, they could lose to LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, they could lose to all of those teams. I mean, those are all losable games, but I think other than LSU right now, you probably favor Alabama, and I don't necessarily think that the LSU game is unwinnable by any means. So there's an avenue. It's just you finally have to kind of get things to click, and it might take a little bit of uncomfortable conversations. It might take, Jalen Milroe kind of, getting a little bit more angry, showing something, because it's one thing to fight with your backs against the wall, when you're on the field, but I think you've got to be fighting with your backs against the wall through practice. If Jalen Milroe or Malachi Moore or Tyler Booker, or Deontay Lawson, I'm just using those guys because they're the captains. Yeah. If they see something going wrong in practice, I think they've got to address it a different way. I think they've got to come down hard. They've got to make examples. They've got to show some kind of fire during practice, because everything you do, you don't know whether if you let something slide, if that's going to be the thing that snowballs into another loss. And so you've got to be back against the wall in everything you do, not just in the games. It's got to be zero room for error at every stage. You use that 1-0 mentality, that's fine, but you really almost got to make it one practice at a time. You got to instill these habits where it's impossible to make these kind of bonehead decisions or these penalties during the game, because you just got your butt reamed during practice so many times for making them that you're constantly aware of all those things. So I think that's probably the biggest focus right now. Can Alabama do that? And we'll see. We're going to see what Alabama's made of, whether in terms of coaching, in terms of leaders. Because like I said, they're backs against the wall. There's no more room for error.
Yeah, it's it's the world we live in now. You do still have a chance to turn things around. I think at the moment though, and it's understandable, it's very, very hard to see that, because you thought that turnaround would happen earlier. And so, I'll end with this, from a public standpoint, because we obviously don't know what's said closed doors and what goes on in terms of that culture. But from a public perception, I think you see a lot of people wanting more from DeBoer in terms of being fired up. I've seen all the comparisons, to Kirby Smart, which are what they are. Um, what are you expecting, and maybe would you want to hear, this week in terms of messaging from DeBoer and the players? Because I feel like it continues to kind of be this same thing, and yet we're not, seeing it kind of change on the field. And so maybe that's a hard question, but you know, do you want to see a DeBoer come up to the podium and be angry, or maybe just what do you want to see generally from or hear from DeBoer, the assistants, the players this week?
That stuff never really. I don't think that would move me. In fact, I think if DeBoer
Yeah,
came to the Monday press conference and was just like totally angry and starts tearing us apart in the media, it would seem fake. I think it would
sure.
almost backfire on him because it's not what he does. So I'd be like, I would, if DeBoer came and was just fiery on Monday and was like a Saban copycat, I would be like, oh man, Alabama's in trouble because he's just trying whatever. And that's just not who
Right.
he is. I don't think he needs to do that. Do I think maybe he needs to be a little bit more, fire and brimstone behind the scenes? Sure, because I know that he also does that. It's not just ice cream sundaes in practice like Alabama fans want to act like it is. I think the things I'm saying is does the coaching staff have to be a little bit more hard ass to the team now? Probably they do. They may have to hurt some feelings too in the process. Because I think you're doing the team a disservice if you don't do that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't think you have to be fake about it. I don't think you have to I don't want to see if I'm an Alabama fan, DeBoer just trying to abandon his ways to try to copy the playbook of Nick Saban, because he's just desperate. That would be scarier than him coming out and being the same measured person. And I think that's all. It kind of. I think it's important that he doesn't give away his style because it will diminish it, for when it does count. I think the part of what makes DeBoer work is that he's always measured. He's measured when the team's doing well. He's measured when it's doing bad. He's not going to go one way or the other. And so, would you want to see it as a fan? Maybe like therapeutically, but I think if you started to see a totally different DeBoer, that'd probably be a bad sign. Now, behind the scenes, though, I do think that, yeah, there's got to be some things where, if players make bonehead decisions, he probably has to come down on them a little bit harder in order to maybe make sure that he's getting the point across.
Yeah.
I think he probably knows that, and I think his staff knows that. And I would think that Alabama is mature enough as a team to know that things are going to be a little bit unpleasant and a little bit, maybe fiery, because I think there should be an understanding that there is no room for error and that those kind of uncomfortable situations are going to occur a lot more. But we're just going to have to see. I'm kind of interested. I don't think we're going to necessarily learn too much in that regard on Monday, but I think you will get hints of during the week whether or not things are clicking, whether or not things are different. I'm expecting to see maybe a little bit angrier Alabama during interview sections, maybe a little bit more locked in, chip on their shoulder kind of responses.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's going to have to be, frankly. This is a big week for Alabama. So to see the response, that'll, I think, wrap it. I mean, trying to get our reactions, just initial thoughts from Tennessee. Obviously, we'll have, some more stories and stuff, breakdowns of the game itself. And obviously, we'll have you covered all week long in terms of what Alabama is saying in response to this loss and how they're preparing for, like you said, a now very losable game like they all are going forward, unless Alabama can show something different than it has and buck the trends that have started to emerge, quite frankly. So we'll see how it emerges, but we'll have you all covered. So you're going to want to stick to Tide Illustrated, keep it right here. We'll have videos of the press conferences, interviews, all that stuff. We'll have a podcast previewing the Missouri game, of course, for you guys on Friday, as per usual. Go subscribe over to Tide Illustrated. Tony wrote a good column about the game. might be time to enjoy a last field storming for Alabama. That's my tease for what he wrote about that. So subscribe to Tide Illustrated, subscribe here, keep it locked in. It is going to be some week for the Crimson Tide, and we'll have you covered. Until then, we'll see you next time.